So let's look at this week. We have two chapters that we are looking at, chapters 13 and, I'm looking at a typo already. Chapters 13 and chapter 14. And these are some of my favorite ones, right, from the text. Particularly some of our topics relating to leadership and chapter 13, and also motivational theory. A lot of us know motivation because we are the recipients, right, of motivational tactics that are used either with family members or in the workplace, at school. What gets us to do our work, right? Often, the easy one is monetary incentives, right? Or for school, it's grade incentives or completing coursework, completing degrees, things like that. But how really do we, if we're employers and we're management, how do we think about, motivating those around us, right? And so that goes hand in hand then, which is chapter 14, with chapter 13, which is about leadership and good leadership. And we can all be leaders. You don't have to necessarily you actually don't need to have any type of title that is a tactical leadership title. You can be a leader in all areas of your life. So just keep practicing that, right? That's one of my homework assignments for the week. Practice being a leader, in any instance that you can. And empowering those around you really is what good leadership is about. Empowering and motivating those around you to be their best selves. All right, so in chapter 13, there are 9 sections. Chapter 13 starts out talking about really what is this idea of leadership, right? We hear a lot about leadership these days, but most of us at some point in our life, we've either had a teacher or maybe a manager or some sort of mentor that we just knew. You kind of felt it, right? You had this intuitive notion that this person really, I feel like I want to, be a better person for them, right? And that's really what good leadership is about. Good leaders are able to really, empathize with those around them and, tap into something that's kind of deeper, right? All right. So thinking about good leadership, what are some of how do we influence our followers, right, from a leadership standpoint and influence them to take action? What are some of the different perspectives, theories, right? So a lot of things relating to leadership, there's a lot of philosophy. And the philosophy says, okay, well, good leaders, there are certain individuals, that have worked in this field that say this is what leadership looks like, good leadership. And this is how it quantitatively produces these results, right? Or good leadership is in this fashion, right? So again, remember that this text in particular, in Principles of Management, there's a lot of theories behind it, right? And really thinking about which one you identify with, right? Maybe you identify with multiple, totally fine. And so thinking about different perspectives relating to leadership. Is leadership, there's always the idea, can leadership be taught or is it something that's inherent, right? And those two wrestle back and forth. And then there are a lot of theorists that agree that all of us have leadership capabilities. We just have to foster those and tap into those, right? And we all lead in different ways, and different instances might need and do need different types of leadership skills. All right, so, and thinking about some of the characteristics of some of the key leadership theories that we talk about in the field of leadership: transactional leadership, transformational leadership, and charismatic leadership. So these are the 3 of the biggies, right? So when you get to that in section 8, make sure that you are paying close attention, right, to leadership and leadership emergence, relating to, in particular, this idea of transformational, right? Transformational is quite dramatic. How do you get people to transform? Right? And how many leaders have we seen? Leaders that are, on the grand stage, political leaders or business leaders, maybe religious leaders, that really transform those around them, right? And so to really kind of drill down on the idea that, a good leader really helps us transform ourselves. How many of those transformational leaders have we seen, right? And so I think there's a few examples that are given in the text. And, transformational leadership, and actually all different types of leadership, it goes across industries. It's not just in business and just in management. We see it in religion. We see it in politics. We see it in maybe military tactics. We see it in education, right? We see it in research, people that are leading their fields. And what is it about them that people want to follow them, right? And so that's where we also look at charismatic leadership. And in this political season, it's fun to be objective and academic, right? And dissect the different things that are happening, dissect the different individuals that are, just dissect their tactics. What kind of leader do we think they will be, right? If we were to elect them. What are some of the things that are important to them? And do I identify with them as an individual? And do I believe others identify with some of their tactics? And so just kind of taking a critical eye as to what makes up a good leader. And it's not always the same. It's not cut and dry, right? It's not like put gas in the car and the car will run. It's not that simple when we think about leadership. I wish it was, frankly. Yeah. So anyway, 15 is and I put in one video there for you for 15 or for 13. And then when you go into 14, and I will circle back to the homework for chapter 13, when you go then into chapter 14, I have multiple videos relating to motivational tactics, short videos. And so when you pop over to chapter 14 and we start talking about work performance and motivation, what motivates individuals directly, indirectly? Do we motivate via the situation, via the person? And so just thinking about some of the things that happen to you at work, right? One of my favorites is this idea that one of the things that I learned early in my educational career, right, was this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that there are certain basic needs that we have to fulfill before we can move into higher thinking needs, right? Hertzberg's motivational theory. These are just a few, right? I also really like Erikson, but that's a little bit more on the psychology side. Erikson's hierarchy of needs, or Erikson's 8 stages. And so, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not only something that you'll discuss in psych class if you take psych, but psychology actually runs across business, runs across leadership, right? Kind of circles around a little bit with science. So psychology, if you haven't, even though it's rather new science in the last century is really when it became recognized, some of the theorists really, they cross over into the business realm because remember, a lot of the things related to the business are how do we motivate our employees and how do we come up with new ideas, new products, new things to make people's lives better. A lot has to do with how they're thinking and feeling, right? So they're very much so intertwined. Especially certain areas like marketing, right? How do we tap into things that will make people interested? And so Maslow, not only is there a video, but there is on page 483, there is a nice pyramid picture there for you talking about, this idea of we have to fulfill certain needs before we can move up the pyramid. And so, this one rings true for me in many ways because I feel like, there's things like we have to secure. We have to make sure we have enough to eat. We have to make sure that we have a safe place to sleep before we can think about, some of our physiological and some of our more social needs, right? If we don't have enough to eat and we don't have a place to stay, we're not worried about going to hang out in the evening with friends, right? We're worried about securing those things. And so thinking about, this idea of you have to satisfy certain things before you can move on. It's almost like you have to have dinner before you can have dessert, right? Even though a lot of times I like to just have dessert. Some of you might be the same way or have dessert first. When we think about it, though, really certain things have to come in order. We walk before we run, right? And even though that's a funny cliche, it's true. We have to be able to stand up before we can walk, and we have to crawl before we walk or before we stand, and then we have to be able to crawl, stand, walk, run. Now we can sprint, right? Plan marathons. It's a progression. And so thinking about that progression, is quite interesting. Anyway, moving on past Maslow, thinking about a few other types of theories, Hertzberg's motivational theory and self-determination theory, different types of learning processes, like how do we learn, right? How do we acquire knowledge? How do things stick with us? And So look through chapter, quite extensive, but look through chapter 14. There are a few things that I find particularly interesting, and I have short videos here, as you will see on Blackboard, that kind of coordinate with some of the highlighted areas from chapter 14. The discussion post this week: do you believe there is one best motivation theory, one that you align most closely with? And so that will be, and this is our last discussion post for the course. So make it a good one, right? Is there one from chapter 14 that you find particularly interesting? You can use items out of the text. You could use the Google if you'd like. You could use to elaborate. And if you haven't tried some of the AI tools that are out there, in other courses that you take, either in business or in other areas here at the college, we will talk a lot about AI and how to use artificial intelligence and a lot of the ChatGPT type features to use them as tools, right? Good prompts to get us thinking about things. Almost like I was discussing with a colleague the other day, almost like having your own assistant or your own editor. Imagine you're writing a book, right? And an editor is supposed to ask you questions, almost like an interviewer, right? And get you motivated to talk and think and spur ideas. Well, having that AI, like the ChatGPT or other items, instead of being like a little bit nervous about like what are we going to do with this new found excitement in artificial intelligence, really trying to figure out how can we use it for good, and we can use it in a way that is, it gives us prompts, much like we would have, a colleague bouncing things off or giving us new ideas or giving us other things to think about, adding to our current base of knowledge. So if you want to use that to kind of, think about some things relating to different motivational theories, you can chime in and say that, I use some ChatGPT and these are some different areas that I found. And then, and see what you can find, see how it works, see how if you haven't used it in other classes, go ahead and try it out. Copilot, I couldn't think of the word. So Microsoft has Copilot, which we all have access to with our Microsoft 365. So Copilot is the Microsoft version of the ChatGPT. Mary in the library, she also is very much up on artificial intelligence and AI capabilities. If you ever have questions, stop in and see her, or you could email her, mhowells@ec3pa.org.